This is Corbin Humble, and Corbin's from Bethany Counseling Center. And today is going to be a little different as far as videos go. We're not talking about a topic so much as Corbin wanted to give you some tools. Corbin, what kind of tools are we looking at today?
Well, inevitably when you're talking to people in counseling, anxiety tends to be a very common issue. And, that often takes a long time to explore in counseling. But I found that there's a few analogies, because I'm an analogy guy. I think in terms of analogies, and a lot of people benefit from those. I like to share a few analogies and kind of string them together in a way that really helps people get an understanding of what's going on when they're anxious and what's a reasonable expectation of how to cope with that. And I found that giving those things to people actually tends to make a big difference.
Even adults sometimes struggle with the emotional awareness to identify what's going on in my body, what's going on in my mind right now. Why do I feel so terrible? And yet we know when we're acting in an inappropriate way in response to what's going on inside our hearts or minds. I think this will be good.
So inevitably when I'm having counseling sessions, people tend to talk about having anxiety. And when that topic comes up, I usually like to share a few analogies that I found really help people get a good sense of what's happening when they're anxious and a reasonable expectation of how to cope with that. And so I usually start by saying, let's imagine you live in like a small tribe in Africa, and they've asked you to go get some water from the river that's about half a mile away. And so you walk out there and you get your water and you're on your way back, and you're about 30 yards away from the village, and a lion comes charging out of the jungle at you. What are you gonna do? Most people tell me, I'm gonna make a run for it. I'm gonna throw my jug at him and get out of there. And I usually say, well, what do you think your odds are of outrunning that lion? They're like, not great. But even though they're not great, your body is actually physiologically designed to give yourself the absolute best chance of outrunning that lion. And so, you recognize this threat's coming at you, and your body goes into fight or flight mode. It's basically kind of like a sci-fi show where they say, all power to the engines. We don't need weapons, we don't need air conditioning, we just need to get out of here. So your body is designed to squeeze out every last drop of energy you can to try and outrun this lion. And so when you're running from that lion, do you need to be digesting your food? No. And so your body turns off blood flow to your stomach. Basically, the energy you need is oxygenated blood to your muscles. And so your body just floods you with chemicals, and it causes your heart to go into overdrive. When you're running from that lion, you can't make deep diaphragm breaths, so your chest constricts, and you take short, shallow breaths. And if you're running from that lion, do you need to write a sternly worded letter to it that you don't appreciate being chased? Nah. So it turns off blood flow to your fingers. And let's say you're just chugging as fast as you can, and that lion lunges out and bites off your hand. That'd be bad, but if you can get to the village, they can cauterize your hand. But you can't live if you die from excess blood loss. So your body actually turns off blood flow to your hands and to your feet. When you run from that lion, you don't need to be thinking about what you're having for dinner tomorrow. So it turns off blood flow to certain higher functions of your brain. That's why people say they can black out or see red, but yet they can still throw punches and get out of there. If you're juking and jiving when that lion's chasing you, you don't need to be, choking on dirt, so your throat kind of constricts and it stops producing saliva. And all these things, make sense to give you the absolute best chance of outrunning that lion. But the reason I go through all that is to help people understand that those changes in their body make sense to help you survive in that particular situation. But what are the chances that when you leave your house today that a lion's going to jump out at you? Probably nil. That's probably never happened to you, hopefully. But the thing is that your brain and your body don't identify different threats and discern those threats and respond differently to different threats. Your brain and your body identify a threat and respond to every threat like you're running from a lion. That's why when, a police officer turns on their lights behind you, you instantly have a sinking pit in your stomach because you're about to get in trouble. When people say they're getting married, what do they call being nervous about getting married? They say you're having cold feet. That's because the blood flow has been turned off to your feet when you're about to get married. Does it make any sense why your feet would stop having blood flow so that you can get married? It doesn't fit. When people get really emotional, their throat chokes up and they just feel overcome with emotion. Does it make any sense why your throat would choke up when you're emotional? If you're having to give a speech in front of a bunch of people, and your hands start shaking and your heart starts pounding and you can't breathe and you have a headache and it just feels like your whole body is betraying you. It's malfunctioning. It's not malfunctioning, it's ready for action. Chances are that if you give a bad speech, they're probably not going to charge the podium. But if they do, you're ready to throw some punches and get out of there. Like, when you recognize that nasty feeling you get when you're anxious is not your body malfunctioning, it's what's supposed to happen, it helps you understand a bit more what's happening to you and not feel so confused or upset. You know that horrible sound when somebody takes a microphone and puts it up to a speaker? That's called the feedback loop. Something as quiet as a whisper can go into that microphone and come out of that speaker twice as loud and go straight back into that microphone and come out 4 times as loud, 8 times, 16, 32, 64, whoom, out of control, right? And that's what happens with our anxiety, because our anxiety identifies a threat and responds with this physical response. Every threat causes this physical response to amplify. So something as quiet as a whisper, just being nervous about a test, being in a new situation, a lot of things, just the unknown tends to be a threat to us. And so it could be a reminder of an old situation. It could be just your mind's thinking about the worst case scenario. Whatever it is, something comes along and causes this anxiety to start, causes our body to start making these changes. And then we identify this as anxiety, and now anxiety becomes the threat. It's like, oh great, I'm having an anxiety attack. Well, here's some more adrenaline, here's some more cortisol. Like, oh, now it's getting worse. I don't know how to stop this. Well, something that bad is happening to you and you don't know how to stop it. New threat, more adrenaline. Like, what if people see this happening? What if what if it ruins my whole day? New threats, more adrenaline. It just keeps this loop going. And so you just get worse and worse and worse. In the severest cases of a panic attack, people start thinking like, I can't breathe. Like, I think I'm having a heart attack. Oh, you think you're having a heart attack? Here's some more adrenaline. Your heart's going to start pounding harder. You're going to have higher blood pressure. Your chest's going to constrict. It's going to convince you that it's actually happening. And the more you think about it, the worse it gets. And so that's just a horrible experience. Side note, I usually like to tell people this. You actually can't die from a panic attack. Like, if you're having such bad panic that you can't think straight and you can't control your breathing, your autonomic nervous system is going to kick in and say like, okay, let's take a nap. You're not doing a good job of this. It wasn't your job in the first place. You'll pass out and you'll wake up with a headache and you'll be fine. Like, you can't die from a panic attack, but feeling like you can if you can't breathe is going to make it worse. And this is a horrible experience. And so we want to figure out, how do we, pull that microphone away from the speaker? How do we break this loop? And I like to remind people that almost everybody has a situation where they're actually extremely good at coping with anxiety. You may not have thought about it, but almost everybody has had a nightmare, right? And when you wake up from a nightmare and you realize it wasn't real, do you instantly feel 100% fine? Like, pay attention to that. Like, most people say they feel relief, they feel better, but like, do you instantly feel 100% fine when you realize that it was just a nightmare? No, you know that your heart's pounding, you know that you're scared, you know you're gonna feel yucky for 5 to 10 minutes, and that's what you expect, and that's what happens. But when people have anxiety, they expect it to stop now. Something's broken with me, something's wrong, I shouldn't be having anxiety. How do I make it stop now? And that expectation to stop it now is actually what tends to keep it going. And so if you treat it like a nightmare, like, something got me threatened, something got me going, I know what's gonna happen and I'm gonna be fine. Like, that's the best way to cope with anxiety, is to accept that it's gonna take 5 to 10 minutes where you're gonna feel yucky because your body's flooded with all these chemicals, and then it'll pass, just like you feel with a nightmare. Before COVID happened, I was actually at a bank and there was a big long line of people, and I had to sign a bunch of checks, and it's hard to sign checks while you're standing up, so I went and stood at a kiosk nearby, and I'm signing these checks, and I hear the door open behind me, so I thought, oh, I gotta get in line. So I jumped in line, and I'm standing there for just a moment, and I hear this voice behind me say, next time you cut me off in line, I'm gonna punch you in the face. And I was literally straight up threatened. So my heart started pounding, my stomach sank, my hands started shaking. I turned and I looked behind me, it's this little old lady with one of those permanently mad at the world faces. Like, I could tell I could take her. Like, I'm okay, I can take her in a fight, so I'm not in danger, but I know that I've been threatened. And so my heart starts pounding. I know I'm gonna feel yucky for 5 to 10 minutes. Like, and anger and anxiety aren't that much different. Like, I could have been angry at her for having threatened me. I could have been angry at her for setting me off, but I just knew she's having a bad day. I'm gonna be fine. I'm just gonna feel yucky for 5 to 10 minutes. And by the time I got out to my car, I felt better. Like, realistically, all you gotta know about anxiety is that, something threatens you, your body reacts, it feels bad, and, once you kind of make yourself feel safe, then you take that time and you give it the time to pass, and if you have that expectation, that's the fastest way you're going to cope with it. Trying to make it go faster actually prolongs it. And so those are basically just a few analogies that I've explained to people that have fear of flying, fear of, different things, that have just generalized anxiety, severe panic attacks, people that think they're having heart attacks regularly, all those things, giving them that framework to make sense of it. It doesn't instantly just make it all go away. That's what you got to accept, is that's not going to happen. But when you recognize what's happening and what to expect, that's going to be the fastest way to cope from anxiety in my experience. Now, bigger things like how your thoughts can lead to anxiety and how you can imagine the worst case scenario and all those things, those may take a little bit more practice, a little bit more exploration with a counselor or with friends or just time. But I found that those things are worth sharing with people because they make a big difference, and I hope they can help you.
I hope that was something that was helpful to you. Thank you, Corbin, for that. If you need any more, maybe some help, a little bit of guidance going through this crazy thing called anxiety, because it doesn't seem to be going away, and I'm not real sure it should go away, learning how to control it, learning how to respond to it, feel free to give us a call. This is Corbin Humble.